All right, hello. Jeff, how you doing?
Doing great, Jim. How are you?
Good. We are frogs. What's that stand for again?
Two really old guys on sports.
And this is our college basketball show, and this is going to be our preview show today. First of all, we'd like to say we're coming to you on the Grueling Truth Network. We'd like to thank Mike Goodpasser for inviting us to do this. It is Thursday, November 10th, the eve of college basketball, Jeff.
Right, Veterans Day. We'll see who the veterans are, see who the freshmen that come forward. Big day of basketball tomorrow. Get the real season. Now we finished election season and a very good baseball season. We go into the real season, men's basketball.
All right. You want to tell the folks who we are or how we know each other? How do we know each other?
Jim and I, unfortunately, have known each other for way longer than we ever want to admit. Go back to when we started teaching in the 80s, and that's why we're two really old guys that can still talk sports. Jim and I taught across the hall from each other in high school and have kept in touch while I did some traveling. He stayed put and has been an icon here in the Cincinnati area for years, as far as I've had the opportunity to watch professional sports in Asia and Europe as well as Africa and South America.
Yeah, we've known each other for about 33 years now, I think. We were actually on a coaching staff back then and with some high school baseball program. So, but we've kept in contact. Jeff has traveled the world. I have pretty much stayed put here in Cincinnati for the 33 years. But we have always had that common interest of sports, all sports. We've done some broadcasts together a little bit here in our retired years, some high school basketball. He's done a little bit of soccer. I've done a little bit of football. He's helped with that. In fact, we got a big game we're going to do tomorrow. So, but enough of us. Let's get on to college basketball, Jeff.
Yeah, good. It's going to be an exciting season. Had a fantastic season last year, which you've got to be happy for because one of your big Easters came through with the championship, Jay Wright's Villanova Wildcats. But that's all in the past now, and now we're on to the 2016-17 season. So
you almost have to jug your memory about what happened. You know, the last we're not going to talk about politics today at all. But of course, that's been taking up a lot of people's time lately. And of course, with the World Series and the NBA beginning, and NFL football and college football, you know, we almost forget when college basketball starts. And so we're really, really close. Again, tomorrow there's over 100 games that will be played across the nation. What do we want to talk about first there, Jeff?
Well, it is before the season, so I think the only thing we want to jump into is what do we talk about in the preseason. Of course, the polls came out a couple of weeks ago, so we'll have varied opinions on how that works as to whether or not these really mean anything or just something fun for two really old guys like us to talk about for the game starts.
Well, I think it gives everybody in the country anyway, and the teams themselves, they will not admit it. You'll hear every coach say, we don't look at the polls. But you know they do, and you know their players do. I think it is a starting point for everyone. I think if you would look, teams sometimes advance quicker if they start in the poll. Of course, I think by the end of the season, your top 25 are probably your top 25 country. But if you start, say, in the top 10 and you maybe lose a game, you may stay in the top 15 and be able to climb your way back, whereas if you start outside the top 25, I think sometimes you have to prove yourself, win 5, 6, 7, 8 games, and to get some people's attention, some of the voters' attention, to get into the poll. So I think sometimes, but in the end, it's all going to wash out in March, of course. But
well, that's what I'm going to say. That's why I think they don't matter all that much. You look across this year's top 25, whether it's the AP or the coaches poll or whatever it is. Of course, you can't do RPI and all those sabermetrics until they get into the season. But you look across it, it's a rehash of a lot of the old names. I think it's more built on the reputation of what they did last year. And maybe the recruiting class as they were rated. They've always got things that say this one got this many top hundreds on the ES10 poll or whoever's looking at those things. If you look at last year's poll, you know, those teams are going to be there because they're solid programs. But Even last year, you got a Syracuse team that wasn't even in the top 25 make the Final Four. And I think you're right in terms of the poll. If you're in the poll, you can stay in the poll. But if you're not one of the 68 teams that gets there in March and then performs, it doesn't really mean that much. You look through last year's, the top 10 were pretty solid, but teams that were there in the poll and they're there again, like Arizona, Michigan State, California, Baylor, Purdue, they all lost in the first round of the tournament. Michigan only got in as the first 4 teams. But then on the other hand, you see North Carolina was ranked number 1, and they went to the Final Four, actually the final game. And Maryland was in the Sweet 16, Kansas in the Elite 8. So I don't know what it is in particular. I don't think they matter because, the cream will rise to the top, and you're going to find out. The reason I think they don't matter is the era, and you're going to talk about it a little bit here, of the one and done. A lot of these players coming in are unknown quantities, and you don't know how they're going to influence the teams probably until they get the conference play. And to me, that's really when the polls start. If you want to go any further than that, just look at the NCAA football poll. Ask Notre Dame and Michigan State if polls matter now. They were rated very high, and they're going to have to kick themselves just to make them bowl eligible. So we'll have to see. It's always fun to see what happens. Whether it's going to be the Syracuse that wasn't in there and makes the Final Four, or an LSU that was in the top 25 and didn't even make the field, and neither did Indiana. Who are those teams going to be? And if you look down there, there's no surprises. Every one of those top 25 is a quality program and has been for a while. So you got to get through the Christmas season. We're paying for Little Sisters of the Poor to come out and play us until you get. To me, the polls really start when it comes to conference play.
Yeah, and really the season, I think it comes in 3 seasons. You have we're going to start out a lot of marquee games, a lot of start of the season tournament, some conference challenges and things like that. And then you get into the conference schedule about the first of the year, and, of course, that becomes very important at that point. And then, of course, the third season is the one that everybody pays attention to, and that being March Madness. Well, you mentioned the newcomers, and I read a couple articles, and I know we talked the other day, you had too, that they're calling this the year of the freshmen again.
That would be my thought, too.
And is this the year of the freshmen? Well, I did a little bit of research, and you look at the polls, the top 3 teams in the country have significant incoming freshmen. Duke has 4 of the top 13 freshmen coming in. UK has 4 McDonald's All-Americans. And then Kansas has a young man named Josh Jackson, by most accounts, is the incoming high school player or college freshman this year. So obviously the pollsters took all those newbies into account when they made their predictions. So, but again, 2013-14 season, they called the year of the freshman. And I think it has a lot to do with the one and done and how important.
Well, I'd be upset because Harvard, obviously, they supposedly got 7 top 10 recruits, and they're not in the top 25.
And, it's kind of fun to watch as the season progresses, because some years some of these teams come together fairly quickly with their freshmen, and they do make a run. But in March, sometimes we see teams that are full of juniors and seniors that have played together for a long time and really gel and work as a team, the ones that come out on top. So is it the year of the freshman? Well, it's the era of the one and done. But there are supposedly a lot more what they think. Well, I read somewhere they think maybe the top 12 will be NBA picks next year. But again, you don't know how they're going to play. You don't know how they're going to affect their teams. And let's look at Ben Simmons last year.
Perfect example.
Did he have an impact on his team? They didn't make the NCAA. Did he have an impact to the point where he became an NBA player? Well, yeah, he was the number 1 pick. So what are we talking about? Are we talking about the effect on the team or how they progress in the NBA? And I think most of our listeners are fans. They want their teams to do well with these one-and-doners if they are at that. Sometimes they're not that. They think they are, but they end up staying a year or two. As you look at UK, which usually has a whole slew of think they're one-and-doners, and a few of them hang around for 3 or 4 years before they develop. So is it the year of freshman? Yeah, again.
I would agree with you 100% on the phrase that you use. It's the era of the freshman. It's since they've gone to the rule that says you have to be a certain age before you can join the NBA draft. It has been that way, and you even see some longtime coaches. When you see Mike Krzyzewski come over to the fact that he knows he's going to have one-and-doners, that's controlling basketball before, whereas his philosophy is always, we want you to come, we want you to get an education, we want you to finish at Duke. And one of the reasons he is the top-rated team in the preseason polls are the young ones that he's bringing in. I'm going to botch the name. Was Adebayo, or I'm not quite sure what his name is. He's supposed to be the big gun out there, but it has changed the game, whether it's Coach Cal at Kentucky, who reloads every year, but also has had its biggest success with the kids who have stayed and not come back, left right away for the NBA. It's going to be an interesting.
Yeah, that's the difference, I think, between Duke and Kentucky. Kentucky, it's pretty much all newcomers, although they have a few. But Duke, you have the potential player of the year, Grayson Allen, still around, and 3 or 4 other starters coming back from last year's team that are going to be in with these 4 freshmen that Duke has. Again, it'll be interesting to see Josh Jackson. He's a 6'7" shooting guard, and somebody did a rating on it and rated him at 102 out of 100. Supposedly he is, but we've heard this before, right? We've heard, Ben Simmons, although Ben Simmons went to not quite the profile program, and the coach, Phil Self out of Kansas, what he's going to do with him, it'll be interesting. And again, he's got some better players from the past still around to help him. So, well, coaching changes, or
yeah, you want to go to that? Yeah, we can do that if you want to. Every year we see it, and it seems like the college coaches just reshuffle the deck. That's what everybody's talking about. So-and-so moved to here, and so-and-so moved to there. It's not as simple as that, but you do see it. It is all over the place. Johnny Dawkins moves from Stanford to Central California, and Jamie Dixon goes from Pitt to TCU, and Ray Harper's going from Western Kentucky to Jacksonville State, Travis Ford, Oklahoma State to St. Louis. You see that domino effect every spring, and you wonder what effect it's going to have. First, there weren't any really big surprises in moves last year. A couple of names I just mentioned, maybe. Bo Ryan leaves Wisconsin, but that was by choice. He announced his retirement early, and he set it up so that his longtime assistant, Greg Gard, could take over. And you've got a few other important names, but frankly, they haven't been important for a while. You got UNLV, Stanford, Pittsburgh, all with new coaches or new lion tamers, but some felt that the Johnny Dawkins and the Jamie Dixon eras had run their course, and they'd gone about as far as they could. Now, the other side of that coin is some people were saying about that with Jay Wright in Villanova, and then he finally gets his team over the top. But, when you look at it, UNLV hasn't really been relevant since the Shark left. It's been a revolving door of coaches, so it's not as big of a name as it used to be. But so there's not any really big programs counting on that coaching change. And it's not quite true. Of the 52 openings, about a third, 17, were filled by coaches moving from one program to another. A couple that I would say to watch for would be, Marvin Menzies. He had good success at New Mexico State, and he's going to UNLV. He knows the area, has recruited the area. Can he be the spark that gets them? Is Kevin Stallings going to have more luck at Pitt than Dixon did? He did okay at Vandy, but he's moving from the SEC into a much stronger conference, in my opinion. And of course, you got poor Valpo, who's not going to have a Drew coaching there for the first time since Moses was a redshirt freshman, because Bryce Drew's moved from Valpo over to Vandy, taking Stallings' place after his brother and his dad were there for so long. And then you got, see, that's why you got to listen to our show, Jim. And then you've got the other retreads that always seem to find, because the quality coaches, is Tubby going to be better in Memphis than he was at Texas Tech or even Minnesota for that matter? And of course, Herb Sendick, I don't think his sidewalk ever ends. He's, after being at Miami and North Carolina and Arizona State with dropping results each time. Now he's back at Santa Clara, which has been a good program at the past. To me, if you want a mover to watch for, and not many people watch this, is watch for the Ivy League. David McLaughlin was amazingly successful at Stonehill in Massachusetts, 189 and 99. Now he's going to go to Dartmouth in a league that takes people to the dance and beats clubs. So I think he'll make that a much more competitive conference even. But as you look, most hires, as to be expected, are long-time assistants that have either been hired from within the programs or they've moved from a storied program into their first head coaching job. And it's really too soon to know if they were just part of a successful program or what they're going to be like as head coaches. And again, over a third of those, close to a half, were these teams. And most people would name. Some of them you would. I mean, they're former players with names like Danielle Marshall, who was known for his playing days at UConn, or Damon Stoudemire, who played in the NBA. So you don't know what's going to go with that. Wins and losses aside, two coaches that are interesting hires in their first college posts. Maybe it's just, the peek inside the circus tent sort of curious you would be, but two former NBA coaches are going to take on college slots. Terry Porter taking over at Portland, and a guy that probably will die on the court because he's just a coach. Mike Dunleavy Sr. is going to take over at Tulane. Now, they've never coached in the college ranks, and let's see if what they did in both of them had some fair success in the NBA, if they can bring that to the college ranks. I would say this, we're going to talk about our dark horses, but I'd almost give it to you now. My one to look out for would be in the hills of Kentucky. Rick Stansberry comes to Bowling Green to take over a Western Kentucky squad that had some issues last year, and they showed the coach the door. There were some disciplinary things, but he left Mississippi State voluntarily to spend more time with his family 4 or 5 years ago. He's been an assistant the past couple of years, but now he's coming back to the head coaching ranks with a heck of a record at Mississippi State. They were competitive. They beat Kentucky a couple of times for the SEC conference, and I think he's going to have the Hilltoppers competitive. And come tournament time, they've got some talent down there. I think something special could be happening down there in Bowling Green.
My dark horse, this will surprise you. I'm going to go with it. They're calling them the Fort Wayne Mastodons now. They've kind of gone through a name change a little bit, I think. They used to be IUCU at Fort Wayne, and now they call them IP Fort Wayne, although I see a lot of things are just becoming known as Fort Wayne. They are in the Summit League, and last year had a very good record, finished second, and are picked to win it this year. And here's what I'm thinking. They got a lot of recruits who are good Indiana basketball players, and they know how to
play. Says the Indiana boy.
They know how to play basketball, and I think that if they can come out of the Summit and get win that tournament and get that NCAA bid, I could see them surprising a lot of people. And I like the Mastodons. It's original. Have you ever heard of that before? Any team called the Mastodons?
The Mastodons, and you got to have fun. You and I have both been in college counseling before, so we've run across a lot of great nicknames, whether it's the Banana Slugs or the Mastodons. So that's great. It's fun to pick a team like that nobody's ever heard of and put them on the radar and see where they're going to go.
So when we have our show in March and everybody's talking about the Mastodons, I want you to think back to November 10th, the eve of college basketball, and I told you first that it would be the Fort Wayne Mastodons surprising everybody this year.
And we these things are all recorded, so we can go back and check this.
All right, where do you want to go now, Jeff? You want to go into our leagues that we've give a little preview of?
Go ahead.
All right, I'll start with my favorite league. And actually, we divided up kind of the power leagues before we sat down today. Then we'll be covering these leagues throughout the year. And I just realized that all my leagues are big leagues, the Big East, the Big 10, and the Big 12. So it's easy to remember which one's
the bigs.
The big. I'm going to start with my favorite league, and is the Big East. And, of course, they're bringing back the national champion in
Full disclosure, we need to say right now that Jim is a Xavier fan, not just a fan, a graduate, a season ticket holder, so it's no surprise he went to the Big East.
And but you got Villanova, although I did read a pick, I think it was Fox News, was picking Xavier to actually win that league this year. And, of course, a lot of people think that the Musketeers will give the Villanova Wildcats a run for their money, but
beat them last year.
Of course, Villanova loses Ryan Archidiacono. I won't have to say that name anymore. And Daniel Oshafu, of course, two of the major cogs in their national championship team. But they're bringing back Josh Hart, Jalen Brunson, and, of course, the guy that hit the winning shot at the buzzer last year, Chris Jenkins. So they're going to be very, very formidable and hard to deal with in the Big East. Xavier, of course, lost Jalen Reynolds and James Farr. They're bringing back Trayvon Bullitt, Edmund Sumner, and J.P. McCura, and maybe Miles Davis has a little bit of an issue right now. I did just before coming to our taping here, he had a hearing today and has settled his legal troubles. Now he just has to deal with Coach Mack if and when Coach Mack will let him back on the team. A big pickup was a young man from Florida, Malcolm Bernard, who played at Florida A&M. He might get a lot of playing time, especially early on, while Miles Davis is not on the team. Again, no one is saying whether or when Miles Davis may be back. It may be the beginning of the second semester, or we may see him next week. That'll be up to Chris Mack and how he deals with that situation. The other big team, or top 25 team right now out of Big East, is Creighton, and they come back with Maurice Watson, that great guard who he really hurt Xavier last year in one of their games. So, and some big losses. Seton Hall lost some players. Providence were in the tournament, and but that's where the Big East is. Which league do you want to talk about, Jeff?
No, well, first of all, I agree with a lot of things you said, and Villanova's got that championship overglow, which probably ranks them a little higher than they might be based upon what's coming back. So it is going to be interesting to look last year with Villanova too. Why don't we talk about for a little bit the SEC? Kentucky, back to you, Jim. I mean, seriously, we'll start with this one, and it's easy. Only team in the SEC in the top 25. Coach Cal reloads every year. Other than the Big Blue, who's there to talk about in that league? It's maybe Texas A&M with Billy Gillispie. For obvious reasons, he would like to thump Kentucky, and they were tied for the league championship next year. But he's got to prove it again this year, and he lost one of his top assistants to another head coaching job. But until one of these football schools can step up and make basketball relevant again, I know it's just not. It's going to be UK and Coach Cal and his one and done. Some people are saying that Florida, with Mike White in his second year, that they might be able to do that. But again, you got to show me the pudding. They've got Florida was 21-5, but only 9-9 in the league, which wasn't a really strong league last year. So it'll be interesting to see if anybody can even pretend to challenge Kentucky this year.
Well, and the name that probably the Kentucky fans are already trying to learn how to say, I'm not quite sure, Bam Adebayo.
The one I butchered earlier.
Thank you. And he is 6'10". Now, sometimes Cal doesn't have the big players, but he's supposedly a very talented post player that could really help the Wildcats out. Mm-hmm. And then Deron Fox is the other one. They're calling him the next John Wall. Again, it's November 10th.
Yeah.
It's November 10th. But and we live close enough to the Bluegrass State. I'm sure we'll know how to pronounce those names.
Well, as Coach Cal found last year, you get it, and he's got 6 kids coming to his program from the top 100. It's how they mesh. Can they come together as a team? Can they develop? That's why I'm saying conference time will let us know. So back to another big.
Let's go with the Big 10.
Big 14.
or the Big Four, yeah. Right now, the highest-ranked seed is Wisconsin, which is interesting because, of course, they kind of had a roller coaster year last year with Bo Ryan stepping down, about a month into the season, if I recall. And, of course, one of his top assistants, Gary Gard, took over, and they actually made the tournament and made a pretty decent run. I'm thinking they made it maybe to the Final 8 or at least the Sweet 16. I know they made it to 16 because they beat Xavier on a last-second shot in St. Louis, as I sat there and watched, and I believe they won the next game, too, and made it to the Final 8. So they're going to be around, and they are one of those teams that keeps guys around for 3 or 4 years and learn how to play that style, that system that Bo Ryan's used for many years up there. Gary Gard has continued. Of course, you have Indiana coming back. They're going to have to deal with the loss of Yogi Ferrell, who was the straw that mixed the drink for the Hoosiers. But they do have Thomas Bryant, their big man underneath, coming back. So the Hoosiers are ranked number 11 in the AP poll. Purdue has got a lot of guys coming back, and they're looking to be a major force. And Michigan State, which we always know under Tom Izzo, they're going to be good at some point. Although his team is very, very young, he lost a lot of his talented players. Valentine, I'm trying to think of his first name. One of his top players he lost, but he has one of the top high school recruits, a man named Miles Bridges, and he's from Flint, Michigan. So he's going to be what they call the next Flintstone that goes through Michigan State. So the Big Ten, of course, has always been a good basketball conference, and that's those 4 should be at the top of that league this year. Back to you, Jeff. Who you talk about?
Denzel. How could you forget a name like Denzel Valentine?
Because it's November 10th, and my basketball mind, my college basketball mind, hasn't totally kicked in yet.
Next for me would be the Pac-12, and and you look at it, and I'm sure sports fans feel this way too. I'm praying for the day when the Pac-12 is relevant again in college basketball. You got to miss those days when you look at some of these storied programs that were in the discussion every year. And they do have 3 teams in the top 10 other than the SEC. It's the second fewest of any of the big conferences. But other than Oregon, they made many folks have got them in the Final Four. They made a great run last year. They're out there. But it's not as bad as the SEC. But after them, Utah is usually there. They don't make the strong run in the tournament time. Sean Miller should get Arizona back to where he's had it, but he's already had some injury issues down there before the season even started. But he's a solid coach, as you know, from his Xavier days, and I think he'll have the Wildcats back in the picture. I don't know that they'll be as dominant as they were a couple of years ago. I guess one of the big issues is, can Steve Alford make UCLA relevant again? They're coming in at, in the top 10 there, or top 16. I mean, they're number 16 in the country. He had a horrific year last year. 15 and 17.
You're talking about Steve Alford, the Indiana legend, correct?
Yeah, the Indiana legend, but he hasn't quite made his legend in Pauley Pavilion.
Well, and of course he has his son playing for him, who's not a superstar, but is a very glue type guy that holds it together when he plays well. Also, I read somewhere they have a really top recruit, Lonzo Ball, coming in. I think part of the problem is they get to L.A. and it's so warm and the weather's so nice they don't want to practice.
Well, I think another part of that is, when you've got 11 banners up there, it's just hard to compete with it. When not winning a national championship means it's a failure year. But a few years ago, Ben Howland had them going back year after year until they let him go. So it's got to be time for them. Who knows? Maybe the post Johnny Dawkins here at Stanford can turn into something. He hasn't. He was one of those that had him right on the cusp, but couldn't go very far with them. So they've got a new coach and a new program. Only Utah and Oregon won a tournament game last year. Everybody else lost in the first round. And it's kind of sad when you talk about West Coast basketball, you're talking more about the West Coast Conference and St. Mary's and Gonzaga than you are some of these very storied programs. So I'm hoping that the Pac-12 can bounce back. Look out for that Oregon team. They're tough. They run. They play strong defense. But, of course, you've got sort of the East Coast bias where they're playing their games later at night and they don't get as much, even though they did get one of the SI covers for this year. But I just really love to see some of these games.
The young man's name. Did you read that story? Kind of an interesting story. He actually hadn't played basketball till about 3 years ago. And he's actually from Montreal, Quebec. It's an interesting story that he has turned his life around, and basketball has really helped him. How he found Oregon. It's I won't tell you the whole story. Go out and buy your Sports Illustrated and read that. Also, Dana Altman, who used to be at Creighton, is out at Oregon now, right? He made that move after the Blue Jays had made a couple big times there in the NCAA. So, all right, you're back to me.
Back to you. Your last big.
Big 12. And there's only one word you need to say when you say Big 12 in basketball. That's Kansas. They've won 12
Not
straight.
That's 2 words.
They've won 12 straight championships, and again, they are favored to win it. A couple teams that might give them a run. You have West Virginia, of course, with Bobby Huggins. He's got some experience coming back, and of course, Bob Huggins always has that tough defense that he will employ to try to win those games. Iowa State had a good year last year, but they lost a couple of big guys underneath, so not quite sure where they're going to be. And, of course, the team I'm going to hopefully see in a week or so here, Oklahoma, they gave a good run last year to Kansas, a lot of tough games, but, of course,
Final Four.
Buddy Held is now gone, so they didn't even make the top 25. And here's one that I think, we talked about for coaching carousel, one that happened last year that might start to play out is Shaka Smart at Texas. What he did at BCU when he was there, he went into that Texas program. I think the cupboard was kind of bare, but he's starting to fill it up. And his system, if it holds true what he did at BCU, I think Texas, if not this year, within the next couple of years, will be a force to be reckoned with in the Big 12.
Well, as I talked to the other programs, you got to go down and establish your culture and get some of your kids in there. That makes such a big difference. But Shaka will do it.
The Warrior. All right, Jeff, you got one. What's your last one?
Well, it's everybody's one, and even though
this is the one I didn't have to convince you to take, right?
This is the one you didn't want to do, is what you said, not to convince me to take. But we shouldn't say that. It came fourth on his list. Came fourth on his list of 4, and that's the ACC, and that's everybody's conference. There's so many teams in there that you're going to look at. They have teams in the top 25, and none of them surprised anybody. Duke at number 1, UNC, which was last year's number 1 and went to the final game, Virginia, Louisville, Syracuse. I read an article this morning that some people are predicting that as many as 12 ACC teams could go to the tournament. And when you look down the line, that's not far-fetched. You've got to go to the 13th team last year, which was North Carolina State, which has a great history, to find a team with a losing record. And that's overall, and that's one of the biggest.
The Irish are in there too.
Yeah, Notre Dame.
Forget about them because they don't play football in the ACC, but they are a force in the
all of them. And you have these storied coaches, of course. You've got Krzyzewski, Williams, Boeheim, Pitino. Even though Rick's got some issues that he might have to get through in order to finish the season, I think he'll be safe with everything that's come down on the NCAA. But will that affect their tournament run, or will they place themselves on another man? One of the biggest problems with the ACC isn't the number of teams, because you're going to have good teams. A Duke North Carolina game is a game to watch. A Virginia, you've got Loranga down there in Miami, which has rebuilt that program into something strong. You mentioned Notre Dame, but also these side teams that come out of nowhere, like Virginia Tech and Clemson, and now Pitt, can they be rejuvenated under Stallings? Florida State, which has had good runs. But the difficulty is in January and February and March, they just beat the crap out of each other. So sometimes that affects where they are come tournament time. You've got teams, Syracuse, which went to the Final Four, was only 500 in the conference last year. It's just a tough conference to get through the regular season and the tournament and come through healthy and not battered. So it'll be interesting to see, but there's a lot of great talent there. Coach Krzyzewski has reloaded. We've mentioned the young lad that he's got down there. There's just too much talent to start naming names, but just keep a lookout for this ACC. It's going to be a wild season for them.
Yeah, you talk about them beating each other up. I almost think sometimes you'll see one of the big names, ranked teams, lose early in their conference. You almost wonder if it's not on purpose so they can get a little bit of rest rather than going through the brutal 3 or 4 days in a row of playing top-quality teams and wearing themselves out physically and emotionally before the NCAA tournament.
It reminds me a lot of when the original Big East was, with those teams that were centered on the East Coast and how they played with Villanova and Georgetown and St. John's and all those guys just going at each other for their bragging rights, and that's the way it is now. So be fun to watch. It's going to be a fun season overall, I think, and it always is. I usually have a hard time getting into it myself until it comes to conference time, because to me that's the one that counts, and you can watch them. But we do have some interesting games coming up early.
Tomorrow, I think it's called the Military
Armed Forces Showcase.
Okay, and being played on Veterans Day very appropriately. In fact, I just saw something that the later game, IU and Kansas, they're going to wear Stars and Stripes uniforms, and I saw a picture of them on ESPN.com. One of them, I believe, the Hoosiers have stripes and white and red on theirs, and the Kansas Jayhawks will be wearing blue uniforms with stars all over them. So, and that's being played, I think, out in Honolulu.
In Honolulu, you got to suffer and go to Hawaii to play ball. Poor things.
But the first game, of course, will be the Arizona Wildcats and the Michigan State Spartans. Is this where we're going to make our picks, Jeff?
Yeah, that's the thing. Aren't we about gone through our agenda here?
I think so. So do I have to pick the opposite, or can we both pick?
No, just tell me who you're picking, and or if you want to alternate, you can pick first, and I'll pick second. And...
Okay, well, let's look at that Arizona-Michigan State game. I'm just going to take the Spartans based on Tom Izzo. He's just a teacher, and I think he thrives off those young guys, and I think he'll have them ready. In the second game, IU, Kentucky, again, I'm going to go to the coaching, Bill Self. I think he'll have his guys maybe a little bit more prepared for that. What are you thinking in those two games?
Well, I can't disagree with what you're going to. These early games, I mean, they're ranked, and they're going to be good games. I would love to go with Sean Miller and the Wildcats. It was just such a class act when he was here in Cincinnati. He's built an equal program out there, but they're beat up. They've got a couple of injuries, and I just don't think they can stick with Michigan State. So I've got to go with the Spartans. But if Indiana is as good as they think they could be, and Kansas might be in the afterglow of their tournament run, but again, you got Bill Self, and Bill Self had to replace a couple of key assistants this year as well. I think if there's going to be an upset at the showcase, it would be the Hoosiers over Kansas making their statement early in the year.
Okay, and then the second big
want me to go first on there?
Yeah, you go first.
Yeah, okay.
I already made my decision over here.
Yeah, okay. Well, this is at Madison Square Garden on Monday, and since we're going to be doing these weekly chalk caps, and we've already gone through all our chalkics, that's on Monday night, and it's going to be number 12 Michigan State versus number 2 Kentucky. Now, Kentucky has they face one of last year's tournament darlings, Stephen F. Austin, in their first game. But I just think Michigan State having to play in Hawaii tomorrow and then having to come back on Monday, that they're just not going to quite be ready for that game. And I think Kentucky's going to handle them pretty easily. Now, the other game, if Duke is who they say they are, I think Bill Self has his hands full. Again, the same thing. They're coming from Hawaii and have to go to New York in such a short time span. I think the Blue Devils will reign in that one.
Well, I got to go with you. I just look at the two teams that have to travel. I'm not quite sure why that was scheduled that way. Probably, well, yeah, we know why it was scheduled that way.
Yes, we do know why. Cha-ching.
But, yeah, I can't see making that trip for the Michigan State Spartans and the Kansas Jayhawks. That isn't going to take a lot out of them. And both Duke and UK, I think, both play tomorrow, but they have cupcakes tomorrow. So that'll be their first prime time where the lights are on and everybody's watching games. So, again, I'm going to take the UK Wildcats and the Duke Blue Devils in those two games. So, yeah, over 100 games tomorrow. Now, like I say, Jeff even said we were getting ready for this show, and he goes, I told him, I said, well, I know Xavier starts Friday. He's like, real games? And I'm like, yeah. Yeah. It comes quick. Sometimes we forget, and I think they've kind of pushed it up here over the past few years that the games get a little bit earlier in November than usual.
Well, usually saw it around when bowl season started. Football bowl season is when they do it, but they have moved it all up. And unfortunately, part of that is the dollar, and part of it is the time they have away from the classroom and all those things that factor into it. But, it's going to be a fun season. We'll come back in a week and see how we did and come up with a few more topics to share with you.
Well, are we going to do trivia questions?
Yeah, well, if you've got you actually develop trivia questions or just little fun facts? Okay.
If you get this,
Jim likes to be able to.
One of the coaches who was mentioned in today's show, today is his birthday. Do you know who that is?
Ooh, it's good. It's always good to have birthdays. You got to give me a bigger hint than that. At least give me a conference or something.
Okay, I'll give you a bigger hint. He's at a new school this year.
He's at a new school this year.
That was one of your top.
I was going to say. So you've got to.
You got a few to guess from.
Yeah, I got 52 that I could guess from. But by the way you're talking about it, it's got to be a bigger name. Jamie Dixon.
You are correct, Jeff. Jamie Dixon, happy birthday. I'm not sure how old you are today.
Yeah. And
he's down with the Horned Frogs now.
And that was just pulling it out of thin air. I
just ran across that today, and then when you mentioned him, I thought, this will work well. Do you have a question for me?
Oh, I don't have any questions. I just want to share with people as they're thinking about their Veterans Day tomorrow to remember that today is the 88th anniversary of the Gipper speech by Newt Rockne at halftime of the 1928 Army Notre Dame game.
Are you going to give us your best rendition of that speech?
No. Watch the movie. Ronald Reagan does it so much better in pleading for it, and then Pat O'Brien as Newt Rockne does it. But the good words to have when you're down, and a great time to have as you're making those halftime adjustments.
Well, next week, we're hoping, we're not quite sure, we will have our second show probably hopefully in the can by next weekend, but there's a chance that I will be in Florida at the Tire Pro Invitational. And you're thinking, Tire Pro Invitational. Well, really, it's the Puerto Rican tip-off is what it was originally called, but they have decided to move it to Orlando because of the Zika virus. So if things work out, Jeff and I have a broadcast tomorrow. We'll see how that goes. We might have another broadcast next weekend. I might not, but if I'm down there, I think Jeff and I are going to try to do a remote. He'll be here in Cincinnati enjoying the beautiful cold fall November weather.
Winter sports.
And
tell them why you're going to Florida and who's in the Tire Bowl Classic.
Well, Xavier's in there, but also several teams we talked about today. Oklahoma is there. Tulane, you talked about a new coach at Tulane. I can't remember who that was. I know Tulane's there.
Mike Finley.
Okay. Clemson's there. Trying to think of the other. Davidson is there. So there's 8 teams, and that tournament actually kicks off the tournament season, so to speak. It will begin Thursday about noon, and then they play the semifinals Friday, and then the championship game will be on Sunday. So if I'm down there, Jeff and I will hook up. I'll give him a report of what's going on down there with college basketball, and we'll be talking about these teams that have happened this week.
Thank you very much. Trog 2 out.